Hey everyone, so excited to have you all here. Welcome to today's session where we'll be digging into how to master test orchestration. Really excited today to introduce Mike. He is our Senior Vice President, like I mentioned, of product. He oversees all of our Sauce Labs platform for test infrastructure. So he actually started his career as an engineer 15 years ago and has built some of the most incredible web and mobile applications for really leading organizations. So MasterCard, Comcast, Verizon, and now he leads our product team, building the next generation of tools, as well as really creating a great product culture here at Sauce. So when he's not at work, you can find him brewing beer, mountain biking, which I think I see some mountain biking awards back there, Mike, and or chasing his kids around the house. So really excited to have Mike leading today's session, and take it away from here, Mike.
Thanks, Madison. Yeah, we're going to just talk about mountain biking and beer this whole hour. So I think that'll be a lot more fun. Okay, so welcome everybody. Excited today to talk about what we mean by test orchestration and what this new product that we launched is called Sauce Orchestrate. There'll be some polls, as we said. Feel free to post questions in the chat. We'll get to it. Want to make this as collaborative as possible. My whole existence here at Sauce Labs is to work with our customers and users to help solve their problems. And I want to hear from you. I want to make sure that this is solving your problems. So let's get right into it then. I want to start with an observation. As Madison mentioned, I've had a pretty extensive background in software engineering, doing all kinds of things across the SDLC and the software engineering practice. And now I'm just experiencing that from the product side. But one of the things that's always been the constant in that entire career has been change. Change is constantly happening in this industry. We always have to stay up to date on the latest trends and technologies. Otherwise, we lose our value in the market. And I'd say that generally speaking, change is always for the better. There's some like example changes out there, the dev process, right? Changing from waterfall to more lean kind of practices. Infrastructure changing, right? It used to be everybody would run things on premise, and now there's the public cloud providers and even platforms as a service where you don't even have to really understand DevOps too much. Even the developer experience has changed. So you used to be able to just work, you used to have IDEs. Even before that, it was just text editors. And now there's even sort of collaborative cloud-based IDEs. And then I get to testing, right? And we think about how testing really did go through a change. And Sauce Labs was actually one of, maybe kickstarted that change. This was years ago, over a decade ago, moving from a manual place to a more automated, the automated testing revolution. Sauce Labs was founded by the creators of Selenium and Appium, and we really kicked off that next iteration. But there hasn't really been we don't really see that there's been a major shift after that, right? And we kind of obviously think it's time for that to change, but we're still waiting for it. I would love to take a quick poll and see what kind, just to start this sort of collaboration here together, on what kind of testing frameworks people are using, right? So we've got a lot of different testing frameworks that we support on Sauce Labs that we help people with, and would love to hear what kinds of automated testing frameworks you're using, so that maybe we can cater the conversation a little bit towards that. So you should see the poll out there now. If you can just pick the one you use the most. You might use multiple ones, but pick the one that really stands out the most for your career or your organization. Awesome. Looking at the results now. I also see some in the chat. Thanks for posting. Detox, a very interesting framework that we look at as well. Most of you are running the Selenium framework, and around 50% of you. Still seeing some good Appium and WebDriver usage. This is great. And Playwright adoption. I love kind of watching the Playwright adoption. I think it's we kind of love the Playwright framework. It seems like it's really growing in popularity. And so this is, I think these automated testing frameworks have done a lot to help our industry, but it's also, I think, it's kind of been the next bottleneck that's occurred though in the industry. And what I mean by bottleneck is really when you think about when these automated testing frameworks are triggered in the process, in the software development process. And this is a really high level overview of what that CI/CD process is, the continuous integration, continuous deployment kind of process looks like, of what it takes to go from really code to through development all the way to running something in production. And I'm not going to go through each one of these again; it's really high level. But the one place where those automated testing frameworks generally impact this process, and then all the other supporting components required to run those automated testing is in that testing phase, right? Generally speaking, there's a testing phase in your CI environment where you're validating that there's no regressions in the new code change that's happening. But there's so many things that get bundled into that testing step. You might have to do setting up a testing environment for you. Maybe you're creating ephemeral environments where or maybe a mock backend that has to be deployed, basically getting that pre-production environment set up for testing. Maybe you're running your integration tests or running API tests or running those functional tests. There's, and this is just one of many steps, or four of many steps that could be all bundled together in that testing phase, broadly speaking. And so we're seeing this more and more become a bottleneck in the process. And the data kind of proves this out. If you're not familiar with some of the surveys out there from GitLab and the DevOps survey, it's great reads about getting an understanding of the overall software development ecosystem right now. But some great trends that we see, right? We're seeing a lot of adoption of automated testing. So we're definitely in this era of automated testing. Almost 50% of teams running full automation suites. And that's double what was reported last year. So heavy adoption of that. But we also see that there's a lot of time spent performing this quality step or this testing step within the CI process. And so while it's much better than the world of all manual testing in terms of velocity, but we're just seeing a lot of that complexity get centralized into the CI process now. And then there's a plethora of tools that people use as well and integrate into their CI environment. And all of this comes, between 6 and 10 tools on average. I mean, frankly, with the customers we speak to, this is a low number, I'd say. There's a lot of different tools that are all being integrated to support the testing phase in the CI environment. And all of this coming together to really create a fairly complex DevOps challenge and testing challenge, to all in an effort, all creating a bottleneck where you're trying to increase velocity as much as possible. We have another poll. We'd love to learn it from everybody about their CI environment, right? What kinds of CI environment do you use? Maybe you might even say you prefer, right? You might not like where you are today, but want to move to something else. Which kind of environment, which kind of CI environments are you operating in today? Great, seeing the results come in now. It's kind of neck and neck between GitHub and Jenkins, which is interesting. I think that I'm always interested to see how Jenkins still holds a pretty strong share of the market. And very interesting to see GitHub taking more of that, and matches up with a lot of what we hear from customers. I speak to a lot of customers who are going through even a transition, right, where they're moving from Jenkins, which is generally they're hosting themselves, to a CI service provider. Awesome. And then I see some others here around Bitbucket and others. That's great. I think that all of these, no matter what of these tools you might see out there, the complexity that we're talking about definitely definitely impacts those tools. And I've been mentioning a lot about these customer conversations we have. Like my job is literally to talk to as many users and customers as I can to understand their challenges. And some of those challenges that kind of back up these data points, right, are around number one, the complexities of the CI build and integration, right? What is it? How complex is it to actually integrate all these tools together, and moving your environment from local to some kind of higher environment, whether it's a dev environment, a staging environment, a production environment. The amount of, in order to do that and make that and have that done really well and seamlessly, there's a elevated skill set needed in the DevOps space, right? More and more of us have to be skilled in DevOps in order for that to really happen seamlessly, or we have to depend on our DevOps team in order to prioritize that work. And I think, let's face it, there's always this challenge between spending time on production environments versus pre-production environments from the DevOps team. The second challenge we hear about all the time is balancing cost and reliability in the CI environment, right? So you're trying to do as much as you can you're trying to become as efficient and reliable in your overall quality practice. And I think when you've got multiple teams and builds running, it can become very costly to do the kind of work that's required to operate to run software releases at scale. And you've really got to balance the amount of cost that you're putting into that. And then the third challenge is something that impacts every engineering organization I speak to, as well as Sauce Labs, right? We're just another engineering organization at the end of the day. And that challenge is the need to release higher quality software faster, really without sacrificing quality. And testing that bottleneck can really make or break your competitive advantage in the world, in your market, as you try to release software faster. And there's always a need. There's always that pressure on engineering and testing and quality to go as fast as possible, as safely as possible. So with Sauce Orchestrate, we decided to try to solve some of these challenges, right? We took a look at what could we do to help solve these challenges that was not being done in the market to date. And this is where we came out with Sauce Orchestrate. So I'm going to stop talking for a second and show this video. I think it's a quick little intro to what Sauce Orchestrate does. Hopefully it works just fine.
In a world where every experience matters, software testing is critical to maintaining high-quality app experiences for your customers. But as your testing suites become more mature and complex, the traditional way of testing can bring development velocity and CI to a frustrating halt. That's why you need a new testing approach that not only improves the speed of test execution, but also allows for end-to-end test orchestration. Introducing Sauce Orchestrate, a fast, reliable, and scalable approach to browser and mobile testing. Sauce Labs' transformational approach to test orchestration is built on Docker technology. Simply package your test code in a Docker image, send the image to Sauce Labs, and sit back as your tests are executed within our grid. By reducing network overhead and latency, Sauce Orchestrate results in up to 70% faster testing compared to remote-based test execution, no matter where you're testing from. This means faster time to market for your web and mobile apps, reduced costs and maintenance burden on your CI/CD pipelines, and an improved development experience through faster feedback loops that improve development velocity, integrations with any test automation framework, programming language, device, and browser, and seamless configuration via Sauce Control, Sauce Labs' robust command line interface. It's time to rethink the way you test. Release high-quality apps faster with Sauce Labs. Visit saucelabs.com.
Great. I love that video. Let me get through this. Okay, great. So let's dig in a little bit more into what Sauce Orchestrate does and how it works, and really how it. We'll start by talking about how it solves the challenge of improving your velocity, right? Having tests run a lot faster through your pipeline. The best way that I know how to describe that is really by comparing it with how tests generally run today in remote mode versus what we're offering with Sauce Orchestrate. So in remote mode, this is assuming some level of knowledge of how Selenium and Appium work and other test frameworks, where the test code itself is running from your CI environment, maybe your local machine as well, but just somewhere outside of the remote grid, right? And this could be, it's the same with Sauce Labs, or really any grid that might be running, browsers and real devices and emulators and simulators at scale. It's the same challenge. But that test code is interacting with the browser mobile device through what are called WebDriver commands. And those commands are essentially network calls, right? Each time that you, in your test script, might say, I want to click on this element, or I want to scroll the page, or I want to get a piece of text or HTML in order to make an assertion later on. Every time you do that, there's network calls that are being made in order to do that. And those really add up, right? Now, there's a wide range of complexity of tests, but what we've seen is we've analyzed literally billions of tests that are run on Sauce Labs, that the majority of time is essentially wasted on the waiting for network calls to return. And so we set out to solve this, right? So with Sauce Orchestrate, we really are changing the execution model of how the tests work. So instead of the test code running from your environment, the test code now runs from within the Sauce Labs grid. And we're essentially providing you an execution environment that can run your test scripts right next to the underlying browser, real device, emulator and simulator, whatever you're using in Sauce Labs, whatever your tests are doing today, they will continue to work as it switches over to Sauce Orchestrate. But you won't have any of that network latency. All that will be removed, right? All those network calls are essentially removed, and it has massive benefits that I'll speak to in terms of performance and error rates. Still integrates into your CI environment. We've still made that a key part of this, is how do we integrate it into your CI environment? How do we integrate it into the test results and everything like that, so that there's really no loss in functionality there, and just getting all the benefits. As the video mentioned, as I'm kind of highlighting, this is depending on a somewhat newer technology, or a technology that's new to the Sauce Labs ecosystem, which is containers, right? Docker containers, or really any kind of container technology that can be run. That's how you essentially package up your test code and all its dependencies and frameworks, and run it in Sauce Orchestrate. So would love to run a little poll here to see what everyone's comfort level is with Docker. You can, it's a range here, seeing if you know about it. Maybe you're super comfortable, use it every day. Maybe you're just learning about it, or maybe this is the first time you're hearing about it. All answers are okay.
And Mike, while people are answering, we did have a couple questions in the chat. I think you briefly touched on it, but if you want to expand, we were asked, what are the execution time limits on this? And then how does Docker image get transferred to Sauce Labs? How does the Docker image get transferred?
Great. I'll go in reverse order. So the Docker image gets transferred to Sauce Labs through, we have two mechanisms for this. You can either provide us access. We have authenticated polling capabilities where you can provide us access to your own registry that you might be using already. And then obviously we would recommend only giving us credentials to access the one image or a couple or a handful of images that you would want to run on Sauce Labs. But the majority of customers honestly choose to go the other route, which is using the private registry that we provide. So as part of Sauce Orchestrate, we provide a private registry that's partitioned only for you, and that way you can only just push your test images to us, and we would only have access to that. There's other benefits for outside of us. There's security benefits to that for sure, but also performance benefits, since our registry operates right within the Orchestrate environment. So we get better pulling and pushing. And then execution time limits. There are no execution time limits with Sauce Orchestrate. It's as long as we do some monitoring to make sure that there aren't any containers that are running and not doing anything, so that they can kind of time out. But as long as you're running tests, there's really no timeout.
Great. And then a couple more have come in, and we actually are going to answer some of these later on in the presentation. But we did get the question, is the Sauce private registry private to the organization? How do I get credentials?
Yeah, it is private to your organization, and you would get credentials. Currently, we would send that over an encrypted channel between your support CSM and then your team. We're working to get that into our UI as well, but it's encrypted sharing, and then there's a rotation that's a key rotation that's provided. I'm going to get to the money savings. I see that question. I'll talk about use cases now. I'm just reading some of these other ones. Okay, I'll talk about money in a second, Michael. Maybe hold on to that thought and we'll come back to that. Primary use case for nightly build runs. So yeah, primary use case is anything that's really integrated into your CI environment, I would say, right? So that might be nightly regression. It might be gated PR checks, right, that you're doing. And that's actually one of the more common use cases, because that's when time really matters, is when you've got development branches waiting for feedback cycles and you want it to run as quickly as possible. And so it's really for both of those. When you're doing development of your test cases themselves, there is no need to use Sauce Orchestrate. You can, but that one you can still just do in remote mode while you're doing development of your test cases. And that's a key point to make. It's a great question, because you can switch. You can really, without changing your test code at all, you can switch between remote mode and Sauce Orchestrate. And that was a key thing, because developing, you're going through faster iterations of trying to get it to work. Credentials, I'll talk about credentials in the demo and how that kind of is passed. We'll do a little demo here. We'll cover the external calls later on as well. So maybe we can close the poll and see how we're doing on everybody's comfort level with Docker. Okay, seeing a lot of neutral, comfortable. That's good. That seems to be the majority, which I'm definitely excited to see. And then even for those that are maybe less comfortable, we are very dedicated to helping just increase the comfort level. A lot of our docs that we'll link to at the end are really a step-by-step process of how to build a Docker image. Like, how do you get up and running with just creating an image and using it in Sauce Orchestrate? To me, it's a very easy entrance into the container world, because test applications are generally, or test programs are generally less complex than like massive, orchestrated DevOps environments in production for running the application. So it's a great way to get started with the technology, even. And we're trying to do a lot to help the, those less comfortable move along. Okay. So that's how it works. Let's talk about some of the benefits, because this is why we're so excited, is really because of a lot of the benefits here. So the first thing is that Sauce Orchestrate definitely helps drive efficiency in your overall testing practice, right? You have less to maintain. You have less to maintain in your CI environment. It simplifies that CI environment, because instead of the actual code and test programs running in that CI environment in Jenkins on the Jenkins nodes, or maybe racking up bills in Circle CI or GitHub Actions, we're providing you that execution environment to run those builds in Sauce Labs right next to the browser, mobile device, whatever it is. Your tests also what we're seeing is they become much more reliable, right? So there's definitely the flaky test kind of syndrome that happens, and a lot of it has to do with the network, just introducing an unreliable variable in the way the tests are executed. So by removing that, we see a reduction in overall flaky tests, which is great to see. It improves the confidence in the test overall. And that's all of this really helping to start to save time in the testing process. And that's really what we're after in a lot of ways, right? We're here to help improve that, reduce the amount of time, reduce that bottleneck, the burden of that bottleneck in the CI process by accelerating releases out to market, improving velocity. And so the impact of Sauce Orchestrate, by removing all those network calls, we start to see test times that are reduced by up to 70%, right? And it's really about removing those network calls. The more network calls that your tests make, which again, you'd be surprised at how many network calls actually get generated with a very simple script. That's where you start to see 70% improvement. And I mean, we actually have a lot of benchmark tests that go beyond this. It's really a linear relationship between the number of commands that are being run and the reduction in time that you're waiting for your test to execute for. And it's all because of the reduction in overall latency. And really, this just has some massive impacts in the overall reduction in time feedback cycles to developers from the test. Now, the other thing we meant, so that's speed, right? But the other thing that we really mentioned here was around how to simplify the overall, that bottleneck in the CI process that involves a lot more than just, running the tests, right? And I mentioned some of those steps that might be taken in the CI process, right? I need to set up the test environment. I might need to run some API tests. I might need to deploy a mock backend. I might need to run the actual functional tests. We called it Sauce Orchestrate for a reason, because it helps you you're able to do all of these steps, right? Not only can you do the basic use case of running Selenium and Appium tests, it's up to 70% faster. That's great, and that's very critical. But we really think the value in the future of this product comes in from orchestrating all those different steps that are being done in the CI environment within Sauce Orchestrate, and providing that execution environment that manages it all, so that you don't have to take on the DevOps burden of doing it yourself. This is just an example. I'll go through a demo. You'll see sort of like what our configuration looks like and how to use it. But this is just an example kind of configuration that no coding required. It's just you're having a configuration that says what the steps in the testing phase are. I'm going to run the API test. I might deploy a mock backend. I'm going to maybe run some Cypress tests in headless mode, and then I'm going to run my mobile tests on real devices, right? And an Appium test suite on real devices. There's endless possibilities, endless combinations of possibilities that you can define within Sauce Orchestrate. And I'll go into some of them in the demo. And the benefits of that are really starts to hit on some of those other challenges we mentioned at the beginning, where you've got a real sprawl of tools that are integrated into the CI environment. And now you can just sort of centralize that in one tool with it throughout Sauce Orchestrate. I think it really also starts to expand the kind of test strategy you might be able to have and run. You might be able to incorporate more API testing. You might be able to really orchestrate multiple different steps and different types of testing together to feed off to feed in some results from one test suite to another. And the one thing that I'm sort of maybe more personally interested in is in how to democratize DevOps for the testing community, for that testing phase in CI, without having to depend on another group to deploy that kind of infrastructure, and in order to really remove that bottleneck of tests. And I know that some of you were asking about what's the potential savings, what's the impact here, and I think because we have so much testing data, we actually, for all of our customers, we know how much time is spent in the CI environment waiting for tests to finish. This is an example customer that runs millions of tests on Sauce Labs, millions of minutes of time spent in tests across both our virtual environments, so the browsers and the emulators and simulators, as well as on real devices, Apple and Android real devices. Because we actually know how many network calls are being made, we can then put a model in place and calculate the impact it'll have. And for this example customer, it's upwards of 3 years of time just removed, waiting for tests to go, waiting for tests to finish. And I mean, there's not many other things that you can just essentially flip a light switch and get that kind of impact. Normally, this would take heavy refactoring of tests and a lot of distraction, frankly, from other things that you might need to do. I see some questions in here. Maybe I'll take a look at this. Does it support Cypress tests? It does support Cypress tests in headless mode. So it's essentially, we're taking that Docker container, an image that you might create, and then we're running it for you and executing whatever command you want executed in that container. And so running Cypress tests in headless mode, because that would be what you do with as definitely supported, and does remove the need to run that in Jenkins. Any limitations here? Let me keep going. I see the questions starting to pile up. Let me keep going, and then we'll come back to some of these. Getting some great results. So we launched this product in May of this year, and getting some really great feedback and really great adoption so far from customers who are, of course, seeing the impact of running their tests within our grid on Sauce Orchestrate and seeing the time savings come to life, And then they're also seeing that improvement in their flaky tests come to life, which is not that, that's not something we can necessarily predict. Like I can predict the time savings because we know the network calls. Can't really predict the flaky tests, right? I don't really necessarily know what's flaky, what's not. This is all, just coming back from our customers who use this, how they've seen some massive improvements in their error rates. So really great results so far. I'm looking forward to more of you try it out. I'll get into a demo here. I want to talk about some of the key components, and then I'll show a demo, and then hopefully that'll probably answer some of these questions as well. But I mentioned this before, it's built on Docker technology, right? Or really any container technology, so you can use Podman or anything that uses the container spec, right, will work. It works for mobile and browser tests. So if your tests work today in Sauce Labs, maybe your tests are running against one of our real devices or against the browser or maybe an emulator or simulator, it will continue to work. There's no changes you have to make to that test script itself, right? You just have to package up the program, the whole test suite as a Docker image. It integrates really seamlessly into your CI environment through our CLI tool, Sauce Control. Some of you might be using that today if maybe you're running XUI tests or Cypress tests with Sauce Labs. But it's a really easy and I'll show you, really easy configuration that you just have to put in that you're used to doing from a lot of different tools. There's also an API that you can use, but I prefer the CLI. It's much easier to integrate into your CI environment. The test results stay the same. So for all of you who are very familiar with the Sauce Labs UI and how we show the video recordings and the logs and the different context that we provide you in your test case executing, all that stays the same. There's no loss in functionality there. It integrates seamlessly into that. I mentioned this earlier. We in order to support sharing of images and having us run the image, we will connect to your existing registry if you do want to go that approach. But I'd say 9 times out of 10, our customers are looking for our private register or private image registry, just to push their test images to our private registry that's partitioned only for you. And then I know there was a question earlier around connecting back into your network, because your tests, a lot of test frameworks actually will need to make internal API calls, whether it's to get test data or to report results back or do a whole number of things. And we've integrated Sauce Connect into Sauce Orchestrate to enable that. So for those who aren't familiar with Sauce Connect, it's a proxy tool that essentially creates a tunnel between our environment and your network. And so since by integrating these two features together, there's, again, no change needed to your underlying test code. The network routing just happens a layer below. Okay. Let me just take a pulse on some of these questions. I think, I got Austin's question here about external calls. Packaging your application in Docker container basically means Sauce Labs can read your code. Okay, so I'm gonna take Stefan's question as very security focused, generally speaking, and we do not allow that leaking to happen. So in the private registry, we're not looking at the code, we're just deploying it. It is up to you. It's what you put in that image, and we have some various capabilities that make it so you can keep secrets out of the image and just inject it at runtime. Your container is sandboxed, so that it's only accessible to to essentially your running of the test. And we work with some of the, just for maybe a level of comfort, our customers are some of the largest financial enterprises in the world, and they're adopting this and getting through those sort of security questions. So we'd love to work with your team on that. We do not have any government agency. And looking at Brian's question around, do we have any government agency using this tool? We do not. Hey, we'd love to discuss what that would potentially take. Okay, resource limitations on Docker container. Yep, you'll see some of this. So I'll talk through some of this in the demo. All right, let's move over to that. I know we're maybe we have 40 to 20 minutes left. All right, so I'm gonna share a different screen now. Let's see how well this will work. Okay, and I guess you don't need to see your own questions. All right, I'm assuming that I think everybody can see my screen just fine. I won't necessarily be able to see your questions, so maybe Madison, you can keep me honest here.
Got you.
All right, so I'm going to run through some different use cases of how Sauce Orchestrate works. This is just a terminal here. I'm going to kick off some tests. The first thing I'm going to start is I'm going to start a simple sort of Java Selenium test in remote mode, right? So this is just running from my machine. It's running Maven, right, as you can see. And then at the same time, I'm going to kick off Sauce Orchestrate, and I'll show you while that's running what's happening behind the scenes. So let's open up Visual Studio Code. This is the project I'm in. It's a demo Java project. The test I'm essentially running is a standard Selenium Java test that I'm sure most of you are very familiar with. I'm running it just in one Windows 10 Chrome. And the specific, so it has a bunch of test cases. It has a couple test cases here. And there is one test case that I'm showing that kind of highlights the complexity, because again, you get more performance boost the more commands that are run. So every time you interact with the browser or get a piece of text. So I'm just trying to make that a little more complex, because these are like demo Selenium tests. So I'm just looping over it to create a little more commands that are being generated. When I ran Sauce Orchestrate, how that works is it's done through a configuration file. So within the same project here, so I've got my, sort of my Java class that I was showing you, my Java test, but then within here, there's a config file, and it's under a .sauce directory. So this is fairly standard kind of commonplace configuration for a lot of different CLI tools. And in this config file, there's some important things to highlight about how this configuration works. It's organized into a set of suites that you can define. Here I've defined one suite, and I'm just giving it a name. I'm telling Sauce Orchestrate a little bit about what kind of work I want to execute it, like a WebDriver test. I'm telling it what image, the location of the image to pull from. I'm also giving it through an environment variable, my Docker username and password to access this image, because I'm using, for this purposes of this demo, I'm using Docker Hub, a private Docker Hub registry. But like I said, any registry would work. Our Artifactory, our own, the one we provide you, doesn't matter. But we do support the authenticated pulling. We have, you can then configure the resource profile that you'd like to use. So how much compute and memory you want available to the running container. We have a couple options. There's actually more. We go up to I think 6 CPU and 6 memory, or 6 megs of memory now. But we have a lot of different options for the kind of resource profile. And then you give an entry point. You say, like, what is the actual command you want run? And here I'm just running basically the same command that I ran in remote mode. It's just calling Maven, right? One thing I love to point out, though, is that I'm actually calling Maven in offline mode. And that's because I don't want it to download all the dependencies again. That's a time savings that you get to utilize you get to see by having Docker. And it all depends on your test framework, but most people use Java, use something like Maven or Gradle. And because everything is already packaged up in a Docker image, you don't need to go through the process of pulling dependencies anymore. And so you can run in offline mode. It saves you a couple minutes just by doing that. And then you can also specify environment variables. And this is whatever you want it to be. This is a great way to share, sort of secrets. It's not that won't be contained within the image itself. You can just have that injected at runtime. There's also a way to upload files just at runtime that get injected into the running container. And again, another way to share secret information around that you don't want to store in the image. And the last thing I think I'll point out is just what it took to build the actual image, right? So this, I didn't change any of the actual code, but I did create a Docker file. I needed to package this project up as a Docker image. And this is this is in our documentation, in our sample code. I think this is a fairly standard Docker file that will be used by really 90% of the world out there who's running a Java kind of test script. But it's pretty standard stuff. You just need to pick the right base image. We have no restrictions on what base image to use, but you just want something to match your runtime environment. You copy the code over, and then I kind of run a sample test without worrying about what the results are. I just do that to get all the dependencies packaged up into the image. We have examples of how to do this for node projects, like a JavaScript project, Python, Ruby, and Java, kind of the main ones. But any program that can run, any test suite that can essentially run in a Linux-based environment will work in Orchestrate, and the same things will happen. So that's the basics of it. Let's go over here. And so we're seeing the results finished up, right, while I was doing all that talking. This is kind of standard Maven output. You can kind of see that the total build time was 3 minutes and 38 seconds. Okay, pretty standard. And then you can see here that it's cut down, by a whole minute, if not more, sorry, like 2 minutes, based on just removing all those network calls. If I go over, let's go over to Sauce Labs UI for a second for those who are familiar with that. Hopefully you got the invitation when you logged in. Okay, so then over here, I'm seeing the results of the runs I just did. Let's see, this is probably the one that we're in Sauce Orchestrate. And all the context, the logs, the data is going to be the same. The videos are going to be the same. The only thing that we're adding are these tags. We add these tags automatically to the tests that were run, because that way you can query for it and you can just kind of differentiate between the two if you want. But again, for the most part, there's just no difference. You get the same experience, and that was really important to us. Okay, let me pause there. I'm going to go to 2 more examples. Are there any questions that maybe I should answer now?
I think we can answer them after you finish up the demo.
Okay, great. Let's move on to the next one. I want to run API tests now, because that's, again, it really speaks to the flexibility of Sauce Orchestrate and how this can be an execution environment for any test. So same command. I'm in a different project. I'll show you the project. I'm going to do the same thing, though. I'm just going to run sauce control. That's essentially the same command that'll be used everywhere. And then if I go over here, I think, here, this is a hopscotch test. So it's essentially, hopscotch is an API testing framework, similar to Postman, similar to some others out there, similar to our own. We have an API testing solution as well. But this is essentially what's happening is it's the same kind of configuration. I'm telling Sauce Orchestrate what's the image that I want to run, and what's my command that I want to execute on that container when it loads up. Here I'm uploading some files as well. I was mentioning before how you can upload files during execution that get injected into the container. And then I'm also able to specify artifacts that I want to pull down. And this is great if you've got log files or test result files that need to get integrated into your CI environment. You can tell Sauce Orchestrate, okay, after everything's done running, I want to pull these files down and then, continue to post-process them like you are doing today in your environment. This one's like pretty straightforward. What you see when things are executing, though, is you can start to see some status outputs happen. So where you're able to see, like, all right, I'm downloading this image, I have a run ID, I'm seeing status change, and then eventually it finishes, and it when things finish in Sauce Orchestrate, it returns all the the console output that would have happened locally if you'd run it. So this is like all the same console output, and then you get a summary of what happened. But again, we're really trying to focus on that seamless transition from what you're currently doing today, where you're executing these in remote mode or in your own environment, to using Sauce Orchestrate. Okay, so then the final example is maybe the more complex one. Let's see. I'm gonna open up this one. Okay, this is a little bit more complex. So here I ran the sort of same sauce control run. This is actually a node project now. And this node project, it's our demo application. So if you're not familiar, we have this demo application called Swag Labs, where you can fake buy some Sauce Lab swag. And what I wanted to do here is orchestrate two things happening. I want to deploy the actual backend, because I have maybe some local changes on that backend I want to run and test against, and I want to run the actual WebDriver IO test. So you can see here it's the same kind of configuration, except I have two suites that are defined. The first suite is I'm starting the web application. And the second suite is I'm actually running the WebDriver tests that run against that that environment that's being created in Sauce Orchestrate. Here the Docker file is since I haven't shown you a node one yet. It's still very similar, where you're starting from the right node version, and then you have to copy the code over. And again, I'm running a command that gets all the dependencies stored within the image, so that I don't have to keep doing that every time. Saves a lot of time during the test being run. Okay, so like this is running, and then if I go over to the test results, we're starting to see some of these tests run. You should start seeing a video. So what's interesting is that you can see that it's actually referencing local hosts. That's because, again, it's referencing that other container that I started to run, which is the actual backend application. And so now it's doing two of those. It's doing both of those things, right? It's deploying the actual backend for running these tests against, and then it's also running the tests at the same time. And all that is now that's not happening in your CI environment anymore. There's no load that needs to happen in your, that load is not in your CI environment anymore. It's now in Sauce Orchestrate. Okay. That's the demo. Let me switch over to the other thing and then see what kind of questions I should answer.
That was great. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so just a time check. We have about 9 minutes and lots of questions. Just going through to see which ones are upvoted. We did have a question around if there's additional costs for Sauce Orchestrate, or how is it bundled with a current subscription.
Yep. So there is an additional cost to Sauce Orchestrate. Essentially, we're providing that compute environment for you. I will say that we are trying to generate a lot more value than we collect in terms of the subscription. So I think it's based on the impact of savings and based on the ROI from running this in our environment and not in your CI. The ROI equation is pretty good. So we're not trying to, we're trying to really provide a lot of value with making it a reasonable price point.
Great. And then Mateus asks, to integrate Sauce Lab, is integration with Bitrise possible? He asked that since Sauce Labs does not have a direct way to interact with Detox end-to-end tests.
So I need to go. This might be, my knowledge of Detox is somewhat limited in terms of what's required to. Or at one point I remember I might need to get back to you on that, on exactly how we would support Detox integrating with an integration into Bitrise. I'm not exactly sure that Sauce Orchestrate would provide. It would play a role there in enabling that to work. Would be great to follow up on that though, and we'll do so.
Yeah, we can take a note on our end. Thanks for that question. And then from another Mike, how does parallel execution work with Orchestrate?
Oh, great question. Okay, so parallel execution is maybe two ways to think about it. There's the current way in Sauce Labs, you can run 50, 100 tests at one time, and there's and against 100 different browser combinations, right? That all still stays the same. Now you can also run parallel test suites, within Sauce Orchestrate. Currently, it's limited to. This is just a thing that we work with you on. Currently, you can run 5 Sauce Orchestrate sessions at one time, and then that's just a number that we would move up and down for you. We just have it set. That's the default, and we can just change it. But again, you have to think about the difference between how many Sauce Orchestrate sessions can you launch, and each one of those sessions could start 100 browsers, or 100 real devices. And so there's no limitation on the number of browsers and devices that you can start. We do work with customers on how many Sauce Orchestrate sessions are they going to start at one time.
Great. And then we had a question around ADA testing, accessibility testing.
So Sauce Labs in general helps many customers with accessibility testing on both browser and real devices. We also there's a lot of things out of the box to help with manual testing and automated testing. And we have a really great partnership and integration with the DQ, which is the maintainers of the Axe framework. So that integration is kind of separate from Sauce Orchestrate. All of that, the same tests that you might run for accessibility tests, though, because those are all based on WebDriver kind of technology, you'll get all the same benefits of running it in Sauce Orchestrate.
Great. And then a third mic, all the mics are out today. How well does this work for ETL validations?
So I think that all comes down to what kind of, I'm almost curious to answer. I always would want to know more about overall the kinds of tests that you're running, the kinds of test strategy that you're doing to test ETL validations. So this is a fairly generic execution environment where you can run any program really that can run in a Linux-based environment. I mentioned we have some monitoring to make sure that you're not mining Bitcoin and whatnot. But for the most part, you can run anything in Sauce Orchestrate. I've seen ETL validations done through API testing, for example, so they're sort of like invoking different API calls along the way as the transformations are happening. But would actually love to learn more. It's a space that we hear a lot about, and there seems to be a lot of different approaches on how to make ETL testing happen.
Great. So we also had a question around if there's any resource limitations on Docker technology, if there's the ability to pull if execution is running or finished.
Yeah, so through so I mentioned a little bit in the demo about the resource configurations that you have. You can go all the way up from like 1 CPU to 6 CPU and 1 gig to 6 gigs of memory. So a lot of configuration there. And the polling, actually, when you're running through Sauce Control, you can see it's polling for status. It's giving you status updates as things are happening in the container, returning all the logs back. And you can do the same thing through our API, but our CLI tool definitely makes it a lot easier.
Great. We also had a question around Asia, if we had any use cases from like the APAC region, any that come to mind?
Yeah, really interesting question. Great question. So you kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of value proposition here, where the distance, what also impacts test execution speed is just the distance between where the grid is, where the browser is, and then where your CI environment is. And, Sauce Labs does not have regions in every single country and every single city. That's not really going to happen. So instead, we're bringing the code to the grid, and it has the same benefit. And yes, it is definitely helping out our Asia APAC customers to improve their test execution speed. So it's great. It kind of creates a consistent experience no matter where you are in the world.
Great. Okay. And then Nick asked, will this support head full mode? So specifically testing browser extensions and iframes, also screen recording of tests, being able to VNC into the test to observe and debug.
So this is what you get out of, I would say, using the underlying Sauce Labs infrastructure of virtual machines and real devices and emulators and simulators is all that capability. You use both at the same time, right? That's what most customers are doing. They're using both of those at the same time. So I'm going to have my tests run against a Sauce Labs head full browser, real device, emulator, and simulator. But I'm just going to have the test script in my CI environment, in my regression test suites, in my where time really matters. I'm going to have that run through Sauce Orchestrate. So you can do all that functionality with with the browser and device infrastructure from Sauce Labs.
Great. Okay, so I think you may have mentioned this, but can we have multiple config YAMLs in case we need to run different run commands?
Yeah, so a lot of flexibility here. You can our sauce control, the CLI tool allows you to have as many of those configuration files as you want. And then you can specify through the command line tool, which file you want to use. And then the other benefit of the approach we've taken is that you can have, the same one image that you've created, but you can have multiple different entry point commands. So you don't have to rebuild the image. It's just kind of separating the code from the configuration in a nice way so that, maybe you just want to use the same image that you build, but then there's different executions that you run against that same image. And it just cuts down the overall build time load.
Awesome. All right. Well, we have one more minute. I think we have maybe just one more wrap-up slide.
Yeah.
I'm going to close this out.
You want to take this, Madison?
Sure, definitely. So thank you everyone so much for all your amazing questions. Apologies we couldn't get to all of them, but our team can definitely follow up. But next steps here, we have a really exciting new interactive demo that we'll be sharing out along with the recording for this webinar. We also have really comprehensive documentation, so definitely take a look there. Should also answer some of these other questions in the chat. And then we would love to chat with you directly. So please schedule time with our team. We would love to just start the conversation of how Sauce Orchestrate can support your business. So thanks everyone so much for joining.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your day.